Hello and welcome to MySecurityTV and our Tech and Sec Weekly. My name's Chris Cubbage. I'm the editor with My Security Media. Today we're joined by Charles Chu, the General Manager of Cloud Security with CyberArk, I think coming in from Boston. Charles, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Listen, you're the General Manager of Cloud Security. That raises a lot of questions for me in terms of cloud security. It's a hottest topic, I think. But I think let's get an introduction to CyberArk. We've had CyberArk on before, so we do know the company well. But identity access management is a key challenge for enterprise right now. But just introduce us to CyberArk, I think, as a start, and then we'll see you here in Australia next week.
Sure. So at CyberArk, we're focused on being the identity security company. And the way that we think about it, there are four different identities. One is the general workforce. Everyone in your company that has an email ID, a laptop, there's a certain set of security deliverables for everyone in your company, the general workforce. The second is the emerging threat of securing your cloud ops and your developers who work in the cloud, and the unique challenges there. And the third category are your classic IT admins who have some of the most privileged access to the crown jewels of IT assets in your company. And the fourth one is actually non-human. So machines, applications, microservices are a different set of considerations around scalability, programmability, that sort of thing. So workforces, developers and cloud ops, IT admins, and machines.
And I think, as you say, given that there's even four and the extent of those four areas, the environments, particularly in the cloud security environments, they're multi-cloud environments now as well. There's two things here. One is you're coming to Australia next week. So I think you're going to be talking to the Australian audience. And that's always good from us from an Asia Pacific region perspective. When you bring your international sort of experience and observations here, maybe where are you going to be here next week? You're coming to Sydney and Melbourne. And I think what would be your key conversations that you're going to be having with your customers?
That's right. So I'll be speaking at the Gartner conference in Sydney in the early part of the week, and I'll be in Melbourne the latter part of the week. I think the topic here is, when I read the stats about Australia, 62% of CIOs in Australia say that they're going to either expand or dramatically expand their cloud usage in the coming year. So it's a very relevant topic. And what we've learned internationally is that the attackers have figured out that too many companies are bringing a classic IT mindset to it. Hey, I only need to secure just the admins or who I perceive to be the admins of the cloud. And what the attackers have figured out with lessons learned from, MGM, LastPass, Cloudflare, companies like that, is that the breaches actually are starting through low-level support or developer or DevOps IDs. And so it's a much wider surface area for attackers to begin their penetration of our customers.
And it still comes down to that human error. We hear a lot of the context around insider threat, but the threat there is just those credentials being sort of given out or released. Then you've also got people just clicking on links. And as you say, those low-level entries can create big problems. And even just yesterday, we were running an international session, and identity access management came up as a key challenge for enterprise. I take it this is a global issue. These are common conversations that you have with customers around the world.
Oh, absolutely. I think customers are very concerned about, as they shift their infrastructure or from on-prem to the cloud, those lines of segregation of security duty have just completely disappeared, right? There's no badge reader, into your data center. There's no physical infrastructure to protect you, and all of those layers are gone. And attackers have figured that out. If you think about the cloud, public service number one in the cloud, many people would argue, is S3, simple storage in AWS, right? That's the most basic thing someone with a cloud ID can go off and do. If you apply that to the on-prem world, that means that someone snuck into your data center, like installed a rack on your data center floor, plugged in hard drives, connected Ethernet cable to a rack, and allowed themselves onto your network. And that's the way someone gets more storage in an on-prem world. Whereas if I have an Azure ID, I can just spin up more storage and away I go, right? So it's a very different way of thinking. And our customers are realizing that, right? You can't think of a cloud console as just another console, like you would like a Windows console or an ERP application console, because those are operating systems and a single application. A cloud console is access to your entire infrastructure.
I think one of the other aspects here is the configuration of identity access management. And this is where sort of CyberArk as the platform comes into play. Where do you tend to start? Where do you find the sort of early solutions there that CyberArk provides? And then as well as the extent of the capabilities, I think that's the other aspect that I find the real challenge here in identity access management is the extent of the capabilities. It's not necessarily complex, but it takes time to roll out.
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that. I think that's one of the common myths. The rollout for identity security in the cloud is dramatically faster than it was in a traditional PAM or on-prem world. So at CyberArk, we've developed a piece of technology that is zero standing privilege, specifically geared to stop the types of attacks that happened at those high-profile companies that I just talked about. And zero standing privilege is pretty straightforward. We go into AWS, Azure, or GCP, and we completely delete any privilege, any entitlement, any role association with every single user, right? So if an attacker steals,
is that right?
Yeah, that's right. If someone steals my credential and logs into one of the hyperscalers, they see exactly nothing, right? Because the hyperscaler itself thinks that I have no entitlements to do anything. And then on the fly, what we do is we can provision a multitude of different choices of roles and entitlements in time. It's this concept we call TEA. On a session-by-session basis, we can change the amount of time, the amount of entitlement someone gets, and the level of approval. So that's, we think, pretty unique and makes it seamless for developers and cloud ops people.
What does the user see? What's the perception that they provide? I suppose my first aspect was from a user perspective with those thousands of accounts. I love the approach. I haven't actually heard of that one before. You basically start again and rebuild, I imagine, in real time or close to real time. The impact or what the user might see, what's that rollout look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we always start from the environment itself and then think of how to secure that environment. So some of the stuff that we're talking about just isn't possible in an on-prem world, right? Like you can't change, add, delete privileges for 1,000 Windows servers, in seconds, right? But you can do that in the cloud. So we take advantage of that. And because we can do that, the experience for a user is transparent. So instead of logging in directly to the cloud console, they just come to a CyberArk portal first. And once they're logged in, we pass them 100% through to the native experience. Because now AWS, Azure, GCP thinks that, Charles Chu actually has these entitlements and privileges for the next 60 seconds, right? So it's completely transparent, whether it's through a browser-based console, or if you're really technical, the technical people don't actually even want to see the console. They want to operate through their CLI, command line interface.
Yep.
So we accommodate that as well.
And I take it the solution, you map that environment first, so you understand what the environment is. The solution is part of all of that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's actually the opposite of a traditional privileged access management deployment. In a traditional deployment, you would have to map all of those things out, which could take weeks, months, quarters. But in the cloud, what we recommend is, in medicine, they have this concept called the Hippocratic Oath, right? Do no harm. So what we recommend and what our customers are doing is immediately using our tool to scan the environment and then just onboarding everybody into our SCA tool, right? Because you've immediately gained the benefit of stopping the types of breaches that occurred at LastPass and MGM and Uber. So you've immediately gained that benefit. Now, your users may be still overprivileged. You may have to sort out the different roles and entitlements and the time and the session lengths and all of that. But now you're sorting that stuff out from a much more secure posture. So get yourself to a great secure posture first, and then work on the privilege. And you don't have to wait months and quarters to get the security benefit.
Look, I've got about 100 other questions how would I actually do this? Because my first thought is it sounds like I haven't done enough on identity access management recently, given some of these, you're still referring to mapping and user impacts. I think if you're automating most of that from an enterprise perspective, there's not a lot of excuse to be challenged so challenged by identity access management with these type of solutions. And I think you're right. A lot of people underestimate the power and capability of cloud environments. Both the risk side, but also the capability side to make these environments safer. Charles, they're going to be seeing you in Sydney at Gartner next week. Then later on in Melbourne. I think our call out to the audience is reach out to your CyberArk contact and get a meeting in there with you. And I think really bring their pain points to you. Sit down and have a chat to you and say, look, this is what we're doing. This is where it might be going wrong. And I think that sounds like you've got a solution for them for sure. So Charles Chu, General Manager of Cloud Security, safe travels here to Australia next week. And thank you very much for joining us today on our Tech and Sec Weekly.
Thank you so much for your time. Look forward to being there next week.